Let's get in our technical experts without much ado. Manav Chopra of Indiabulls Ventures joins us right now in our studios to talk about how the charts are shaping up. Manav, good having you. Thanks much for joining in. Did you anticipate this?
Actually, we did not. This kind of a V-shaped rally, it was something not called on the cards. But definitely looking at the overall structure, we did anticipate that, in the worst volatility, 10,400 would have been the lower support levels. If those levels held, we were expecting some sort of a bounce. But, this is completely on a surprise note. But eventually, it gives us more confirmation about, the structure, the overall trend still remains intact. This V-shaped kind of a recovery where, the decline, we saw those gap patterns which is getting filled on immediate basis. Bank Nifty today is closing above 200 EMA. This is adding to a lot of momentum that could, we could see next coming few trading sessions. Most importantly, a good amount of shorts were, trapped. What we can understand from this, and that would eventually lead for another rally, at least in Bank Nifty. I sense 27,000 on the immediate basis could not, it could not be ruled out, but eventually 27,300 is what we can see, and for the Nifty on the immediate basis is 10,700 is the resistance. If that is breached, I think 11,000 is the immediate targets that we're looking at.
We might reach that today only. It's 10,694, so 10,700 not too far off. Would you take any option strategy on the index now? Probably, play the upside of there.
For the index strategy, we are initiating two kind of a move. One is we are buying out of the money call, which is at 10,800. We have already initiated it. But for the expiry point of view, at current levels, I think even selling 10,500 put or 10,400 put is something which would be more of a defensive play. So it's a mix of a strategy that we are going forward. But eventually, I think the momentum will be on the buy side. So in this scenario, I think one should not be on the short side, but initiate positions on the longs.
What about some stocks?
Yes, I have two stocks picked. My first pick is on Siemens. Actually, if you look at this chart, since quite some time, the prices have declined from its peak of 1,500 and a good 35-40% decline from its all-time highs. The prices are trying to form a good accumulation pattern at the current levels. If you look at the weekly volume, it shows a good amount of spike in last 5 weeks with good bullish accumulation pattern, and in such kind of a sharp decline, this stock did not form a new low, which was being quite loud, saying that there are some good accumulation which has taken into place. The prices have seen a fresh breakout today on the daily chart perspective. It has limited downside for a medium term to long term perspective, a stop loss of 900 for an upside target of 1,070. My second pick would be buy on Canara Bank. Basically, most of the PSU banks are showing some sort of a momentum, but Canara Bank has shown a good amount of relative outperformance. The prices have seen a good bounce from its lower support levels, and on the short-term charts, it is forming a series of minor higher bottoms. So eventually, I sense the prices are likely to even breach its recent peak and eventually move ahead. I would not be surprised to see the PSU as a space would see another 10-15% upside, but Canara Bank would have that and extra alpha. So, a stop of 247 for Canara Bank on the lower side for an upside target of 285.
Interesting. So, some stocks to watch out for. We'll discuss a lot more. I would have well asked Manav about what's happening to the Indiabulls Group stocks, but obviously can't. Anyways, let's talk about stocks which are buzzing in trade today. The Indiabulls Group is one, but Sharad Dubey has got 2 or 3 which are really moving around in the session today. Sharad, what's on your list?
Yes, Neeraj, the first stock in my list is Aditya Birla Fashion and Retail, which is up by almost 9%, its highest levels in a month. This is based on the news that CLSA has retained its buy rating with a target price of around 232 odd rupees. So basically, the main reason is the brokerage says that there is a robust EPS CAGR growth of around 29% in FY18 to 21. They also think that the operating leverage benefits will be seen, which will help the margin expansion in pantaloons. And in the innerwear segment, the losses will peak in FY19 as the business gains scale. The second stock which I have picked up is Motherson Sumi, which is up by 5.3%, which is highest levels in a week. So this is based on the news that Bloomberg reported that China is moving towards cutting its trade war tariffs on imported US-made cars. So basically, the proposal is that there will be a reduction in levies to 15% from the current 40%, which has been submitted by China's cabinet which will be reviewed in the coming days. The third stock which I have picked up is NBCC, which is up by almost 4.5%, its highest levels in a week after it gets a construction order work of around 172 odd crore rupees from Government of India. So these are the 3 stocks.
All right, Sharad, thanks very much for that. So interesting picks there and a lot of activity around them. Natasha Shankar of Yes Securities is joining us on the show right now. Natasha, good afternoon to you. It's definitely a very active day's trade, and now we've got the event risk out of the way. State elections are done with. We've got a new RBI governor at the helm as well. So the uncertainty around that too fades away. What's the roadmap going forward?
So I think if you're looking at the immediate short term, we should see the markets remaining quite stable and probably on the up move, given the fact that most of the key events that most of the investors were waiting for are now behind us. But if you're looking at a slightly longish term picture of about 8 to 9 months, we do think that there's a lot of volatility that would come about in the markets on account of the Lok Sabha elections, as well as the fact that there are a lot of global issues related to US, related to China, related to the war escalations, and at the same time there are issues in UK related to the Brexit and the slowdown in Europe. So all of these issues would be hurting markets overall, global markets and Indian markets. We do not think that the Indian markets would be an exception to it.
So are you selling into the rally?
Not really. We're just sitting back on cash, and we would prefer any dips to come in before we start accumulating stocks.
You track the auto space very closely, Natasha. I don't know if it's got to do with with China's decision on tariffs from the US space, but that's got the auto space revved up by and large, or it could well be a part of what's happening to rate sensitives today. But one view on autos, and two on companies like Motherson Sumi predominantly, which might benefit fundamentally as well if indeed the global car market tends to improve. What are your thoughts here?
So absolutely, we have seen a slightly longish slowdown affecting Motherson Sumi, both on the global front as well as on the domestic front, because even the passenger vehicle space on the domestic front has been quite disappointing overall. So that has led to a correction in the stock. But if you're really looking at any kind of a turnaround coming up in the global auto market, the Motherson Sumi definitely stands to benefit from it. And at the same time, as it continues to ramp up on some of its new facilities, we would see improvement on the profitability front too. So we have been accumulating Motherson Sumi for a while now, and we continue to remain positive on it.
Okay. What else are you positive on, Natasha? I mean, what will you be adding to the kitty?
So I think something that we've been positive on for a very long time is the consumption space. So within the consumption space, stocks like Titan Industries or even Pidilite Industries, we're quite positive on. Both the companies have actually seen a sizable amount of shift in demand from the unorganized to the organized segment. Titan, of course, sees it on the jewelry side. Pidilite sees it on the adhesive side, wherein the unorganized segment still continues to play a pretty large part. And we do think that this shift is only going to continue in the foreseeable future, which in turn would be driving the structural growth for both the companies. So within the consumption space, I mean, we are positive on pretty much all of it, but these two would be our top picks.
Okay. Manav, since we're on the topic of consumption, one stock, Bata. I mean, the stock's been quite active in the last few trading sessions, approaching 1100. How do you trade this one?
Actually, the stock is in a very good momentum. It is continuously forming a series of high tops and bottoms, and recently we did not see any sharp correction into this. There was a very brief pause. The stock, paused at its crucial weekly support of 1000, and eventually is now heading towards 11 or 1150. Most importantly, every new high is accompanied by higher volume. So I sense, this is overall a buy on dips approach stock. Having an important short-term support at 1050. Anybody who wants to initiate can take a fresh call, keep a stop loss below 1050 for an upside target of 1150.
Okay, that's on Bata. The other one, that Sharad mentioned was Aditya Birla Fashion. I mean, very active today. Volumes have picked up, about 3.5 million in terms of volume, and the AV80 function, if you could get that to see how much more or what kind of difference is there in terms of the actual additions of volumes on this counter. Stocks at 201 now, 17 odd points higher, and there you can see a stark difference versus the last 20 days volume average for an Aditya Birla fashion. How would you read into this?
In fact, the stock after a good consolidation breakout on the monthly charts, has been consolidating its gains, and if we see on the weekly perspective, it has seen a sense of a breakout. I sense as long as the prices hold on above the levels of 190, there is a big chance that this could be one of a good, it's getting all set for a big rally. Will not be surprised to see a good 20-30% upside in less than 2 or 3 months, because the overall formation is showing a good consolidation breakout. The volumes are also confirming the same. Any short-term pause or a decline into this towards the levels of 190 should be accumulated for high targets of 250.
All right, that's Aditya Birla Fashion, when the stock is extremely active today, about 9% higher. Let's take a look at a few other movers within the small cap space, which is the index itself is up closer to about 2%. But like Neeraj highlighted, it's the India Bulls group stocks which are doing really well. Some banks are doing well. So Bank of India is up 7.5% right now. JSPL does okay, 7% higher. India Siemens is up 5% at 93. PNB Housing Finance, 5.5% higher. Tata Global Beverages up 5%. Future Consumer, Torrent Pharma, 4.8% higher. Torrent Power, up 5% as well. Comment on any of these banks, Manav, the smaller PSU banks. They're all active since the last 2-3 days.
In fact, I just mentioned it, most of the PSU banks have witnessed a lot of fresh short positions which were created a few days back based on a lot of events and the lineup. But, the kind of a retracement rally we've seen and the stocks breaking above its important short-term support levels and resistance, this will lead to a lot of fresh unwinding happen and long built up. So eventually, there'll be a multiple play which could come into these stocks, and most importantly, these stocks are bouncing from its monthly oversold level. So, my top picks would be Bank of Baroda, Canara Bank, which we have already initiated a call, and the other would be a Union Bank. So, all these banks will not be surprised to see at least a minimum rally of 15%, a possibility in less than 2 weeks. But eventually, I think one should play this only for a short-term perspective. And once, if that 15-20% rally plays out, it's time that you start reducing, because this is just going to be a short-term momentum play on the upside.
Natasha, before we thank you, are you looking to buy the Sun Pharma twins, either Sun Pharma or Sun Pharma Advanced Research?
I think between the two, we prefer Sun Pharma Advanced Research, because they have built up an excellent R&D pipeline, and it's just a matter of time before they start getting the approvals towards it. So that's a company that we prefer over. We prefer Spark over Sun Pharma.
Yeah. On a relative basis, it's fine. On an absolute basis, would you go out and buy Sun Pharma Advanced Research at the current levels, or would you deploy the money somewhere else?
We would prefer. No, not really. Within the pharma space right now, we would prefer to pick up a company like Aurobindo Pharma, or even Biocon for that matter, not really a Spark.
Okay. Natasha, leave us. I know you mentioned that you will rather sit on cash and wait for the time being, but if the markets were to correct and if your choice of stocks were to correct, what is that one top idea that you would look to buy? Incidentally, Persistent had an analyst meet. I don't know what you made of that.
So Persistent would not be the one that we would be accumulating right now, but if we were to go out and buy something, especially if it corrects slightly, would be Moltech Packaging. The company has an innovative packaging concept, essentially, which is an in-mold packaging, which is something which would see an uptick, especially from the FMCG space. So if you're really looking at the entire consumption space and the growth on the FMCG side, then it is very difficult to ignore packaging from it. And within that, Moltech Packaging would be one of our top picks.
Okay, we'll leave it at that, Natasha. Thanks so much for joining in and giving us that perspective. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Well, hear out one more market voice, Neelkan Mishra of Credit Suisse, who thinks was some thoughts about the new RBI governor and the BJP losing ground in the Hindi heartland.
Traditionally, RBI governors came from the government. right? So some of the best governors we've had, like Dr. Reddy, have been bureaucrats themselves. So it is important to understand how the other party is thinking. There is a very natural institutional conflict between North Block and RBI, which I don't think goes away. And this is something that I have found that bureaucrats are kind of adept at acknowledging. The turfs being defined appropriately, the interministerial conflicts. I think these are things that bureaucrats are used to handling. So I think it would be unfair to assume that just because he's come from the government, that he's somehow a government man. Because the moment you switch positions, there is an institution that you are part of, and you start acting appropriately. And he's a very seasoned and a very mature person. I don't think that should be a concern for us.
But no concern. I mean, the only follow-up that I have to this is, in the morning when we were talking, Neelkanth, the common point that came out was, and of course nobody knew about the move being so swift, but the common point that came out was that with Urjit Patel doing what he has done, does it mean that the new person who comes on board as the head of the institution will also be very guarded when he takes decisions on the 3 or 4 contentious issues of sorts between the Reserve Bank and the government? And 2, will the government itself be a bit guarded before making moves if it wants to on 2 or 3 of those contentious issues, namely the reserves issue as well? What do you think is the way ahead?
Right. So, see, I think it's important to have a conversation. See, not having a conversation is where the problem was. See, both sides have I think, fair points on most issues. And it is important to discuss and find a middle ground. And I think that process perhaps had stalled and perhaps can restart. So on most of the issues, like, the issue of the dividend, there is a committee sitting now, and the committee will advise on what's the right level of reserves, and then the RBI can take a decision on what to do. And all those things were discussed and negotiated. Now, the issue of the role of the RBI's board going forward, again, just like when the Monetary Policy Committee was set up, it was, perceived by some that the RBI governor's autonomy, or rather, the discretion is being sort of diluted. But as the economy, as the system has sort of settled around having a Monetary Policy Committee, and I hope that the MPC as an institution itself matures. But you realize that there is a certain level of continuity that a committee brings in. So having that debate on whether, we are a 2.5 trillion economy, if you have to get to a 5 trillion economy, do we need slightly different institutions than what has got us here? There is no harm in having that debate without getting into this issue of, no, I am independent, right? So you could reduce individual dependency without getting the government involved. So there are ways and ways of going about it, but the good thing is, or the important thing is, to actually have a debate and a discussion. And it will be stressful for both sides, but what comes out at the end of it is a good solution.
Okay. Changing tracks to elections as well, and is there an impact on fiscal profligacy? That's the most abused term right now, but I'm still using it, or a lot of the factors that could come into play in the run-up to May 2019 and thereby on the markets?
See, if I was a politician looking at these results, and not just these 3 states, but also Telangana, and interpret this verdict, right, collectively, what I would realize is that the fact that low food inflation, which is, I think, great for the macroeconomy, is actually terrible for farmers, and there are too many of our workforce in farming, and therefore it creates a stress for a very large percentage of the voter base. And how do you address that? And finding some creative solutions for that. Now, one of the reasons perhaps that the TRS won almost 80% of the seats, much better. In fact, the vote share went up from 34% to 47 almost. And despite the alliance, the TDP Congress, their vote share actually shrank, so 40% went to 32 or something. This shows that perhaps the Raitu Bandhu scheme and a lot of the pro-farmer doles that the government gave out may have had an impact. I mean, interesting to do some analysis on, seat-wise, assembly seat-wise voting patterns and rural versus urban and all that. But that would be the headline takeaway. And if that is the case, then will that tempt other governments into implementing some such schemes? From a fiscal perspective, what we have to keep in mind is that state government deficits are generally not an issue, right? Because of Article 293 of the Constitution, the central government controls every rupee that the states borrow. So if they end up giving doles, if they end up giving a lot of farm loan waivers, it will be at the cost of something else. So it's a resource allocation issue. It is not a fiscal deficit issue, right? Because the fiscal deficit mostly is capped at 3% for all states.
Okay, on to some macro data then.
Right. We've got India's consumer price inflation as well as the IIP numbers, which is slated to come out today at 5:30 in the evening. Projections suggest that you have the IIP number, which will come in at about 6% for the month of October versus 4.5% in the month of September. CPI is seen at 2.58%. We've got Aditi Nair, who's joining us from ICRA. Aditi, thanks very much for taking out the time. Just start off first with what are the various variables that you've factored in, and what projections are you making for the IIP and CPI this time?
Thanks, Ira. Our forecasts are slightly different from the consensus that you just read out. On the IIP, we are actually expecting a pretty substantial but very temporary uptick to a growth of around 7% in October, led by manufacturing, electricity as well as mining. But I will add a word of caution there that this uptick to around 7% or so is expected to be really quite temporary, and we are expecting a fairly strong slide in November based on the early data that we have so far. As far as the CPI is concerned, we had actually pegged the CPI to slide to around 3% in November, although if it does come in a little bit lower than that, I'm not going to be terribly surprised. Basically, we will have a deeper deflation in food prices. Also, the impact of the correction in fuel prices would be there in the month of November. HRA, the base effect would continue to kind of pull down the headline on the core CPI inflation. And even as far as fuel and light is concerned, there is a pretty strong base effect that should pull down the YOY inflation to quite an extent. And overall as well, if we look at the headline CPI number, there is a positive base effect which will pull down the overall CPI inflation number. So 3% or a little bit lower than that is basically what we are expecting on the CPI.
And can you highlight for us what would you factor in terms of the effect of the currency this time?
So in terms of the currency, we did have a pretty good pullback in November for the rupee. And typically the impact of that tends to come in much more quickly into the WPI than into the CPI. So that's one of the reasons that we're not looking at an even sharper deceleration as far as the headline CPI inflation is concerned. On the WPI, we do think that the headline number is going to come down to around 4.7% in November. So a larger correction in the WPI inflation than in the CPI inflation, benefiting from, firstly, the first round impact of crude oil being part of the WPI index, but not the CPI. Secondly, a large component of landed, fuel prices that would go into the WPI rather than the CPI. And also then the overall rupee impact on the core WPI inflation would be far faster and to a larger extent than what we would see on the CPI side. So that's broadly what we're expecting. Both the CPI and WPI will correct from the previous month, but the impact would be larger on the WPI side. And the gap between them, of course, would continue to be pretty wide.
Okay. With regards to the IIP growth numbers, you did see manufacturing numbers pick up last month around. Electricity also saw an uptick on a month-on-month basis last time. Capital goods, consumer non-durables, food products, where do you see the trend headed?
So this month, actually last month, what we found was that it was mining that kind of pulled down the headline number to some extent, because we had a very weak mining print for September. For October, what we're expecting is that sequentially there will be an uptake in manufacturing and electricity as well as mining. So all three of the sectors are going to support an uptick. There are a few factors which are really at play over here. Firstly, we had, a late Diwali. So, some of the production that typically would have happened in September would have been adjusted into the month of October instead. There are other base effects, and also there was the impact of floods that took place in parts of the country in September that affected the production schedule. So all of these three we think are going to push up manufacturing sector growth in October. We saw a very sharp growth of auto production in October. Of course, sales were not that great. And of course, this has been followed by very weak numbers for November. But in terms of what the IIP would take into account, it would be the auto production numbers for October, which showed an overall growth of around 21%. So very high numbers over there that would temporarily prop up the IIP growth. Coal India as well, and the overall core sector, when we look at the breakup from the core sector data that we have, both coal and electricity did very well in October and have been followed by dips in the production growth in November. So here again, we expect a temporary positive impact to be there. Excuse me. Cement growth was extremely high in October as well, and that's definitely something that will show up in the infrastructure construction index of the IIP. Export growth also revived after that dismal performance in September, which again was related to base effects, etc. We haven't seen the exports number for November yet. That should be out by the end of the week. And that will also give us an indication as to where we can expect the IIP to be heading in the month of November.
Got that. Aditi, thanks very much. Really appreciate you taking out the time and highlighting all of those aspects for us as we await the CPI and IIP numbers this evening at around 5:30. Well, time for a very short break here on Countdown, but on the other side, we will get you the Fab 4 stocks of the day, and we also get you a dealing room check at around 3:15. All right, welcome back. 28 minutes left to go for market closing, and it's a very pretty sight right now for the indices. Bank Nifty, mid caps, small caps, you point your finger at it, and it's heavily in the green. So let's take a look at what's been happening globally as well. So that too lending some amount of support before we move on to the Fab 4 stocks of the day. That's the Nifty 50 for you, the highest point of the day right now. Let's take a look at what FTSE CAC as well as the DAX is doing. Then we take a look at the turnover right now as well as the market breadth. And that will give you an all-rounded picture of what the current market position is like. So if you could just have those, okay. We'll get on to that in just a few moments. That's the advanced decline ratio on your screens, heavily tilted in favor of the bulls this afternoon, and the global picture also very supportive. CAC is up 1 1/4. That's the Dow futures, which is up in the green by almost 0.7%. Taking a look at the Fab 4 stocks of the day now, the stocks that have made it to Yash Upadhyay's list. He's joining in right now to highlight the same for us. Yash, good afternoon.
Afternoon, Devina. Lots of gainers today. Let me start off with ACC, and that one is up about 3.5% after the board of directors of the company approved a mega 3,000 crore rupees expansion plan, which the company says would be funded through internal accruals. So it's up 3.5%. Ashok Leyland had surged at one point more than 3% after the company said that it has entered into an agreement with Israel's Elbit Systems for the supply of high mobility vehicles. Yes Bank is trading higher today, up 5% ahead of the crucial board meeting which is there tomorrow. And the last stock I want to highlight is actually Bharti Airtel, up 5.5% today, snapping its 6-day losing streak with volumes coming in significantly higher. So watch out for that one as well.
Yash, thanks very much for that. So those 4 interesting stocks in Yash's Fab 4 list. Let's bring in Rahul Mohinder as well. He's joining in right now to talk a little bit more about a few other stocks that he's keeping an eye out for, and the index in particular, which is now comfortably above 10,700. Rahul, would you take a position now on the long side after 2 straight days of gains and the pullback that the index has seen? Or just wait it out for this to cool off and then enter at a slightly more favorable price point?
Good afternoon. I think the market and traders are really looking at making sense of what's happening. There's a lot being digested in those prices. But to answer you very clearly on the index, I wouldn't go long at the present level, even though my stance would be slightly neutral to bullish. Clearly because the market's risen quite a bit very quickly, making the risk is to reward ratio a bit against me. 10,800 on the Nifty is resistance, 26,700 to 750 is resistance on the Bank Nifty. We're kind of playing very close to those numbers. I'd really like to see if we can sustain another day or two above those levels before one makes a slightly bigger call. So at this point, I think one needs to keep in mind the key level of 10,800 and 26,750 on the Bank Nifty. And on the lower side, one needs to see that 26,350 on the Bank Nifty doesn't break down. If that starts breaking down, we could even resume back into a downward trot. So we are very carefully and critically poised. It's very important we watch for the breakouts before we come to bigger conclusions.
Okay, let's talk about some ideas then, Rahul. You've got a call, a buy call on a Bajaj, I think that's a Finserv Finance, Bajaj Finance, and a buy on Apollo Tyre.
Yeah, Bajaj Finance is the stock I'm discussing here. And again, we've seen a nice big run up from those 2,300, 2,350 levels already to 2,500. But I think we're clearly good for more. So from a short-term perspective, we should move to about 2,700 to 2,720. I keep a stop loss of 2,400 when buying into the stock. Again, long-term, we are quite bullish on the outlook for this stock. This is really a short-term call I'm making, hence the smaller levels. Apollo Tyres, again, something we like long-term. But from a short-term trading perspective, 245 to 248, a reasonable target you can expect. I'd like to buy into Apollo Tyres, keeping a stop loss at that 228 mark.
Manav, we were talking about 10,700 just a few minutes ago, and looks like it's extremely comfortable now beyond that.
Yes, I think most importantly, we'll have to see, if we are managing to sustain also above 10,700, we will see some series of more short covering going forward. Maybe, this week, if the weekly closing is also above 10,700, so in no time, you will see 11,000 levels coming. So ideally, this move has been quite surprise for a lot of traders. So I don't sense there would be any corrective or any chance to for any traders to buy on the dip. So eventually, one has to take their chances, maybe keeping a tight stop of 10,600 for a momentum play, but eventual targets seems quite possible towards 10,950 levels.
Okay, that is still another 200 points away from here. Siddharth Sidani of Anand Rathi is also joining us on the show right now. Siddharth, what would your approach be?
Well, in terms of markets are concerned, I think most of the events are out of the way. Of course, it's been a little disappointing the way ruling party has missed most of the key states, but overall perspective, the most of the events are out of the way. In fact, I would say RBI, a new appointment of RBI governor is also one of the strong factors which has come into the market. I think we don't have much of a triggers, and of course holiday season right in front of us. Along with that, what we believe is January can be one of the month which can be very key for the markets, because we will getting December quarter results. So overall perspective, we are positive on the market. One has to be very stock specific currently, and the kind of move which we have seen today, I think it is a respite move, but I think slowly and steadily I find the market a little positive only.
Okay, just stay on with us, Siddharth. We'll come right back to you. Lots more to discuss. But time for our chart of the day segment now. And Dr. Reddy's is the stock in focus. It's fallen the most in over 5 months after the US court order ruled out the drug maker's appeal to sell Suboxone until Endeavor's window to challenge the order gets over. But how bad is this fall for the drug maker? Yash Upadhyay is here to analyze that for us. Yash.
Thanks for that, Devina. So today itself, the stock has fallen more than 6.5%, and with that, it has wiped out nearly half, or actually more than half, of its year-to-date gains in 2018. So as of yesterday's close, the stock had given a year-to-date return of almost 12.5%, and with today's move, as you could see in the red rectangle, it has fallen below the mark of 6% at this time as well. So what is it that has impacted is the US court ruling that you mentioned, which has temporarily prevented the company from selling its generic version of Suboxone. Now, the markets had assumed an immediate launch for Dr. Reddy's, and this has come as a negative, which according to brokerage firm Equirius could go on to impact its earnings estimates for FY19.
All right, Yash, thanks very much for that. Siddharth, a quick comment on this development for Dr. Reddy's?
Well, Devina, we don't cover Dr. Reddy overall perspective, and we believe that still operationally there would be a lot of issues pertaining to this company. Of course, the facilities will be again observed by US FDA, and you may find some kind of issues. But overall perspective, we still are positive on biosimilar side of the business, where there is less pricing pressure overall. So on that basis, we like Biocon in the pharma space, and we are quite constructive over that. One can always look at buying Biocon with a target of 823.
Okay, not a Dr. Reddy's but a Biocon. But nonetheless, on the charts, would you go short of Dr. Reddy's, Manav?
So in fact, if you look at the charts on a high time scale, that is the weekly and the monthly basis, the prices have confirmed a long-term trend reversal after 3 years of decline. So, it is still a buy on dips approach. I think such news events or opportunities, it provides good opportunities on the lower side. The overall trend is still intact. And I sense around 2450 would be an important support. In case if we see a short-term dip, I think that could be a level where one can look to add on at the lower side. And previously we had mentioned Dr. Reddy for a medium-term to long-term pick, and we maintain our upside target of 2900.
Okay, got that. A few other stocks then to keep an eye out on this afternoon is a Hero MotoCorp. The stock now up 7.5%, and that's at the highest point of the day. 3,260 volumes of 1.9 million shares. UPL has moved up and seen a good gradual momentum to levels of 792. That too is at the highest point of the day right now, and the volumes have kicked in for that one too. Adani Ports, Bharti Airtel almost 5% apiece, and Eicher Motors, the big move there, 4.5% for that one, 23,691. The auto pack as a whole has resurged in today's session, a lifeline of sorts that they've got. You've got Tata Motors also, 164 on the counter. Come to you, Rahul, on any of these auto names?
No, I definitely see bounces coming back, not just in auto. I was looking at a lot of auto ancillary stocks, particularly from that short-term perspective. A lot of things have been, going in its favor. I looked at M&M this morning. We think there's a good possibility of a short-term rally. Even Tata Motors, a stock that's really taken the beating over the last few months, we see good support at 150, 55. It's bounced up from those levels. I'm not saying the worst is over, but maybe even if we move to 180, 185, it's still a meaningful 8 to 10% move that one is looking at. So if really short-term is your focus and, the next 8 to 10% is where you're looking for, I think there couldn't be a better space than auto. So the breakouts are clearly visible within auto, even auto ancillaries, as I was mentioning, Apollo Tyres being one of our top picks there.
Okay. Bharti Infratel is the other one, which is just cracking a little bit under pressure. And from amongst the consumption names, I think Titan is looking slightly wobbly today. Excuse me. Manav, Titan.
Titan overall has been consolidating, its gains after a good rally from its recent lows of 765, and it's consolidating its move above its 100 and 200 DMA, having important resistance at 940 on the upside. So I think as long as the support level of 920 on the lower side is held, the overall trend still remains intact, and eventually is likely to see a breakout on the upside. So if the stock is in an uptrend, we can expect some move coming forward, and as the momentum indicators are still in the buy mode, we maintain a buy into this. I think going forward 975 could be the eventual target for this stock. One can initiate long positions, keep a stop out at 915 on the lower side.
Okay, just the flurry of stocks that have gained. If you just look at the Nifty 500, not the most confidence inspiring move. For 1% beverages up 14%, HDIL 14%, DB Realty 12%, Infibeam 11%, MTNL about 11%. Then Well, you have some stable names like AB Fashion and Canfin Homes, but GVK Power is up about 8%. So the set of stocks which have really gained quite dramatically in the session today, the broader end of the spectrum, are not the most confidence-inspiring names, to be honest. Actually, just a quick word, Siddharth Sidani, Aditya Birla Fashion on a roll today. Any thoughts here? Any coverage?
Of course, Neeraj, that is on our top radar and preferred list, Aditya Birla Fashion. As you know that it's a turnaround story. Since 2 quarters, the company has been posting profits versus the corresponding year quarter losses. And we are quite constructive on the 2 part of the businesses. One is Madura Lifestyle, which has been Alan Solly, Peter England, and so on and so forth. Many brands with their increasing their branded stores. Same store growth is quite strong. Margins are around 9%. We can expect little further expansion in margins for Madura Lifestyle. Pantaloons, of course, same store growth has not been coming, but we expect that in coming 2 quarters, same store growth can come. Along with that, they have been increasing. They have plans to increase 40 to 50 stores every year for Pantaloons. Along with that, of course, the shopping experience which the company is planning to improve for the consumers. Let's not forget management. This company has got into innerwear business also, and management expects a strong growth to come out from this business also. Aditya Birla Fashion, I think in the retail space looks the best. We know retail is in the buzz because of many other reasons of global players entering into the market. But overall perspective, Aditya Birla Fashion and retail, we have a coverage, and we have a buy recommendation with a target of 239.
Okay then, stay on, gentlemen. Let's get a sense of what dealing rooms are recommending in the session today. Darshan and Yatin join in with their channel checks. Good afternoon, both of you. Yatin, let's start off with you first.
So Neeraj, it's clearly a day of short covering, and the kind of rise that we have seen, clearly a lot of traders are of the view that the short covering has just started. Of course, big boy Reliance Industries has seen a move in the last 15 minutes of trade, and dealers do indicate that here on the basis of technical trends, a BTSC strategy is something that one should watch out for. Almost 1.5% up for that one on huge volumes. Nearly 1.2 crore shares already traded in the cash segment. Bank of India also is one of those stocks which is up 8%, and in general the momentum is there in the PSU banking space since yesterday. So watch out for Bank of India as well. And finally, IRB Infrastructure. This is one stock wherein dealers are indicating that there is a lot of short covering which is happening, and the uptrend because of short covering could continue as far as this counter is concerned. But Darshan has a few more stocks to talk about.
I think the theme certainly seems to be agri. You can see UPL up almost 6%. All the commentary that's come into the elections do indicate that there could be potential, a lot of emphasis that will be given to the agri sector, to the farmers, a lot of farm loan waivers as per reports that have come out. So companies which are basically involved into agriculture or agriculture related are benefiting. UPL for one, you could see, has moved up on very high volume, so that's for the one. The other 2 stocks, again agri related, look at Escorts, look at M&M, both of them moving significantly. Potentially a farm loan waiver is something the Congress has already said in the 3 states that they will form. There will be that farm loan waiver. A couple of newspapers reported that even PM Modi will go ahead with a mega farm loan waiver scheme. So that seemed to be the theme. Look at how Hero MotoCorp has panned out. It's up almost 7%. The 2-wheelers are spurring. So the entire theme of late has been agri. Apart from it, the other counter which is spoken about is Axis Bank. Again, doing well in trade. Lots of almost 70 lakh shares have already been traded. Some of the domestic mutual funds are actively accumulating. So that's what's been spoken about.
All right, Darshan, thanks very much for that. So that's a quick channel check, dealing room channel check on what stocks are active and what are buzzing. But interestingly, we're now almost 200 points higher on the Nifty. So it's 10,740 on the index. That's a very smart intraday move on there. There's been no sign, of struggle of any sort or a tussle between bulls and bears. It's a glide. It's just one way up this afternoon. Should put up the turnover to see how that has shaped up in trade. Remember, yesterday particularly was heavy on the F&O side. We closed with a figure of about 12.5 lakhs because of, the extreme amount of short setup in the system that started to move out. Yet again, today you are seeing the F&O number slightly higher, about 9 odd lakhs. You've got 10 minutes left to go, so you may nudge 10, 10.5 by the end of trade now. On the cash side, you're already at 30,000, so closer to 31,000, 31,500 on NSE cash is what you can expect by close of trade. So encouraging session, a broad-based move. The mid caps and the small caps have also contributed. So definitely a big thumbs up in trade today. But anything else, Manav, that you spotted in the last half an hour that one should take note of?
See, at the current levels, if you're looking at the chart of TVS Motors, it's standing out. It's basically given a breakout from its triangle pattern, and after a good sideways consolidation, having resistance at 560, it has breached decisively, and the volumes today are above its 100-day average volumes, which also indicates that probably going forward, the prices are going to see some much more move ahead. So on the lower side, if you're looking at, the risk-reward ratio is quite favorable. 560 can be the stop loss, but for on the upside, we can see targets of 620.
Okay, closing strategies from our experts. Rahul Mohinder, if somebody wants to take home a position, what would you advise?
I go a little aggressive, buy into Yes Bank. I think this is a big one because once it gets past 190 odd levels, we're looking at 205 being the first target. So I'd kind of buy Yes Bank, keeping a stop loss of 181.
So Yes Bank, and well, interesting. It's had two strong days. Rahul, risk reward still in your favor? I mean, it's been what, a 10-11% move already.
Well, considering we're still looking at 205, I still think we are on the brink of breaking out. If you look at a slightly bigger perspective, we can't forget this is a stock that's really melted the most within banking, and finally seems to be finding some kind of a bottom between 160, 170. So this is an interesting point, could be a turn point too.
Okay. Manav, if you had to choose one top closing strategy?
GSFC at the current levels, the prices are forming a good inverse head and shoulder pattern and a fresh breakout of, and the prices are closing above its 100 EMA. The volumes are supportive. So if I have to pick between TVS Motors and GSFC, I think both are very well placed, but GSFC could see that short-term spike on the immediate basis, and it is also confirming a good bottom formation, a stop of 106 on the lower side for an upside target of 115.
Okay, GSFC, and it's forming what an inverted head and shoulder pattern, and I think that's the reason why Manav is choosing to buy this stock. 109.40 is GSFC. Well, Hinomoto Corp is the top gainer. It's ending also virtually at the high point of the day. I think two-wheelers by and large seem to be having a good day. Siddharth Sidani, what's the best two-wheeler stock to buy? I'm classifying iShares also as two-wheeler, and then the other three. So out of the four, which one would you look to buy? If you were to buy, if you have to buy.
Well, Neeraj, none of them, because we still believe the kind of numbers it has posted, although this is a dead cat bounce which we are seeing on the back of farm loan waivers and some kind of a growth in the agri space. I agree to that point. If in terms of farm loan waiver comes, there would be a big boost in the agri space, but not going with two-wheeler. Any of the two-wheeler is just because of there is still a mess in terms of numbers are concerned. When you can't get the traction in a festive month like Diwali, I think it is very difficult to get the traction back. If you go back to Maruti's numbers also, there was a little bit of a disappointment. So I'm not going with any of the two-wheeler. In fact, if I want to play out rural space, I have a lot of things to play. I think FMCG is one of the play likes of Hindustan Unilever one can always look at, because I think consumption will definitely pick up if you have a rural play. If I talk about again rural play, then I would like to go with the tractor financing companies like of Mahindra and Mahindra Financial, where again, in case if there is a disposable income in the hands of the rural economy, then I think investments in tractors and so on and so forth would be quite high. So tractor financing companies like Mahindra Financial looks very interesting to us.
Interesting. Siddharth, point well taken. Thanks much for joining in today and giving us your perspective. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Neeraj.
Yeah, I think the bigger question would be what to do with the index. If forget what to do when you are short, because I think if you are short, it's no brainers that you should get out, because you don't stand against the tide when it's turning. So that is out of the question. The question mark only is that at this level, about 2% higher, is the risk reward still in your favor if you want to take a long position? Now, Rahul Mohinder, I know you gave this answer right at the start of this last half an hour, but let me wrap up with that as well with both of you. 500 points on the Nifty Bank, 26664. Yes, yesterday was characterized by short covering. Today I would presume some long build-up would have happened too. But if somebody wants to take a trade right now, is the risk reward favorable on the Nifty Bank?
No, I'd start by saying no, clearly because of the fact that there is a lot of resistance expected, not just at 26,750, like I said earlier, on the higher side 26,900. Now, when you join this all up, we're talking about 250 point stops. So from a short-term perspective, if you're someone trying to look at this market from a December perspective, I would say no. I think you're going to definitely be struggling at those hurdles. And at the same time, look at entering closer to 26,300, 26,400. I think you'll get that rotation. So timing-wise, I can't be perfect, but my hunch is it's a no from here.
Manav, would you second that? It's okay to differ.
Most importantly, what I just mentioned some time back, if we are seeing such kind of a surprise move, it's unlikely. I've seen in the past, there is a pause. Usually the market continues its momentum on the upside. So, given a choice, I would still want to. I would still want to go for the long trade.
A fresh long.
Yes, a fresh long also. On the Nifty Bank at the current levels can be initiated, a stop of 26,500, which is the 200 EMA level. So, keeping that in play, a risk of 150 points on the lower side, having the upside target that I've mentioned of 27,000, the risk reward is still in the place. And, if these are the momentum rides that, one needs to initiate, because with short covering rally, I don't see some sort of a breather coming in for the market.
So what's the strongest banking stock then?
If I have to pick from the private banks, it will be Axis Bank at the current levels. But I feel going forward, it will be the PSU banks, which would, if I have to select for the extra alpha, it will be the PSU bank. So from the PSU, it will be the Bank of Baroda, and from the private, it will be the Axis Bank.
Okay. So a handful of stocks, and well, some of which are doing really well. Frankly, you can scan all across the screen, but the Nifty 50 has some serious momentum going for itself right now. But not to take away the fact that the broader end of the spectrum is marked by some very good movers. I can't ask Manav about these stocks, but Rahul, I can ask you about the Indiabulls group. We haven't discussed those all of the show. Ventures, Indiabulls Real Estate, Indiabulls Housing Finance, all of them have done very well for themselves. Do any of the Indiabulls group stocks look good?
See, one of the stocks that comes on the radar at this point, shockingly, is Indiabulls Housing, and I'll tell you why. We've got 650 odd, we've got several bottoms which were attempted, back in the end of October, then we had it in November, and now again we kind of bounced up from 660, 670, that was just yesterday. And above all, there's a lot of volume that's been clocked around this 670 to 700 belt. So we're trading well above that belt. That support is well respected with a lot of price and volume action there. So one has to keep this level in mind, that this could well just be a solid medium-term bottom. As soon as we start seeing levels above 760 odd, we may even rally back to the previous highs of 850, which we saw in November. So from a trading perspective, this is a stock that's got to be on the radar. I'd still be willing to buy it for that 850 target.
Okay, interesting. Today, Rahul Mohinder, save for the Bank Nifty call, is going in for stocks which have already rallied quite a bit. Manav Chopra, of course, comfortable on the Nifty Bank itself. So, well, our experts are taking that slight call of risk in the session today as well, maybe going ahead with the momentum. Speaking of momentum, let's start wrapping up the markets and talk about the momentum. Strong moves across the benchmark indices. So the Nifty 50, the Sensex, as well as the Nifty Bank, all closing in tandem, 1.8% apiece for each of these. It's been a really strong day, and quite frankly, not one that too many people would have anticipated, to be honest. The mid caps and the small caps, and 3% for the small cap index. We want to see what the FI numbers are today, because yesterday was a deep, large FI sell number. We're very, very interested to see, looking at the Nifty 50 names, if the FIs have moved up, and then, of course, kind of delivery-based buying that we would have seen in select mid cap. So we'll wait and watch of that during the close of trade today. However, let me start off with what's happened to the index movers today, and then Devina will bring you up to speed with what's happening to the mid caps and small caps. Indiabulls Housing 7%. We discussed all of these stocks just a while back, so I won't repeat all of them. But Bharti Airtel 6% higher. It's not usually that you see this happening. UPL about 5% higher. Eicher Motors 4.5%. Mahindra and Mahindra about 4.5%. And I think the tractor companies have got it completely right today. The only one which is worth speaking about on the losing side is Dr. Reddy's, but you already know the reason. That's ended about 4.5% lower. Again, not at the lowest point of the day, but hardly any losers, a lot of gainers. And while the mid-cap universe is just so much larger, I would believe the traction in the winners is much better than the traction in the losing space, Devina. A clutch of names moving around on, well, fairly solid volumes as well.
Good price movement, good volume action. You couldn't ask for more today. The mid cap and the small cap indices are also trading with heavy gains of about 2.5 to 3% apiece. The mid cap 100 is up 2.6%. The small cap index is up almost 3% this afternoon. Individual stocks then, and the quantum of gains is much higher than what you're seeing in some of the large cap names, and that would rightfully be so. 17% gains for Indiabulls Ventures. So like we're talking about Indiabulls Housing Finance and the entire pocket, the entire group, Indiabulls Group stocks doing really well. Indiabulls Real Estate also is the other one that you should pull up. That stock too is up heavily by close at upper circuit 10%. Manpasan Beverages is the other one that's doing well for itself. 4 seconds left to close, and the stock will be ending in the green by 14%. HDIL, DB Realty, Godrej Properties, that's the wrap up within the real estate pack, a high beta pocket, and on a day like this, all of them giving you double-digit gains. AB Fashion is the other one, good gains coming in there. Camfin Homes, from the smaller banks, the PSU banks, all of them which are doing really well today. The PSU banking index is up more than 2%. Bank of India, Syndicate Bank are some of the other names that are doing well. Future Consumer, Radico Khaitan, United Spirits, and Equitas are some of the other names that are extremely active this afternoon and have seen increased volume action along with the pricing action. So there has been some support on the volume side as well. But that's the end of trade today, and what a day it has been. The start was fairly subdued. In fact, when SGX Nifty kick-started, we did see a red on the screen, but from the word go, the Nifty picked it up, and you had bulls taking complete charge towards the end.
Yeah, let's bring up the market breadth to kind of exemplify that point as well, because it was just rock solid and it stayed this way for most part of the trading day today. It just goes to show how strong the confidence of the bulls was, and well, rock solid for better part of the trading day today.
Yeah, let's take a look at the turnover as well, and then we talk a little bit more about the contributors. So closer to about 10 lakh crores, 9,55,000 odd crores on the NSE F&O. On the cash side, 32,200 crores. That's in line with average, I would say, but slightly more higher on the futures and options side. BSE cash though, 2,941 crores. On the contributors side, then we should pull that up, and on the index, 193 points on the gainers and just 5 points on the losers.
Yeah, no point talking about them, but financials clearly right up there in the list of gainers. Nevertheless, final thoughts from our experts then. And to you first, Rahul, you've kind of made this point that you would believe that while the risk reward on the Nifty Bank may not be completely favorable, there is still some upside left. What about the broader markets? Because they have shown some exemplary strength today. What do the mid-cap, small-cap indices charts tell you?
No, I think that's where the essence is. If you're looking at a rate of return, I would not chase the index. I would really be looking at the fact that there are several. I think earlier you were making the point that PSU banks is an area which is kind of something that could emerge. I agree with that totally. I think within banking, if we break out, I would not focus as much as on an Axis or an ICICI, but maybe look at the smaller run, maybe a federal bank, maybe some of those smaller plays which have been out of action, which are already breaking out. And volumes, a lot of volumes have got clocked in these last 2 weeks in these lower levels. So is the way forward. Rather than chasing an index for a few hundred points, you can make significantly more money if you're really trying to pick within the stocks.
Manav, your thoughts? Same question actually.
Like I mentioned, I would be going quite aggressive on the PSU banking space, and what I have also seen right now, after Bank Nifty closing above 200 EMA and the short covering, like I had mentioned for the PSU space, I think moreover one should be trading this for at least for 2 weeks point of view, and trying to bag at least 15% is what I'm eyeing at. So Bank of Baroda, Canara Bank and Union Bank are my topics.
Gentlemen, both of you, thank you so much for joining in today and giving us your thoughts. Really appreciate your time today, and well, all the best with the trades. But that brings us to the end of this edition of Countdown from Devina and me and the team that put this show together. Thank you so much for watching.